In the last episode, we found a section of space inhabited by the Hirogen, which is interesting when we were previously told that they were nomadic, but let's ignore that for now. We know they're inhabiting the place because we found a permanent installation, specifically a training camp for new hunters. We also found that they were using the holodeck gubbins Janeway gave them a few years ago, which is good, but that the holograms had super murdered the shit out of everybody and legged it, which is bad. Or is it? The doc got nabbed by the group of rebels, and we discovered those bloody Hirogen only went and made them feel pain and fear, all the better for hunting them. And they made them smarter, too, so really, the holograms didn't do anything except what they were made for, which is fight back. It's not their fault if they became very good at it. The doc tried to explain all of this to Janeway, who was working with the Hirogen after feeling a bit guilty about how things turned out. He asked for her help, and she told him to bollocks. For some reason, she instead decided the best way to correct having indirectly caused suffering is to knock them all offline, maybe to find a solution, or maybe to hand them back to the Hirogen. I don't see them being okay with us just flying away with the holograms who killed a load of their mates. The doc thought this was bullshit, which is fair, and decided to stick his oar in by telling the leader of the rebels, Bajoran Boss, about the science wibbly Janeway was going to use to knock them all out. Oh, and he joined them as well, perhaps having decided that there's no point in just doing half a betrayal. Bajoran Boss and company managed to deflect the science wibbly and bugger up Voyager a bit. While it was disabled, they kidnapped B'Elanna, who the doc previously said may be able to help them set up holo-emitters on a planet so they can settle down. As the doc treated her injuries caused when Voyager got buggered up, the rebel ship legged it, probably to make sure they're out of weapons range when Janeway figures out the doctor has stiffed her. We rejoin the rebels to find the doc fucking fuming about being involved in the kidnap of B'Elanna. Kabooming bits of Voyager and desertion are fine, but he draws a line at the event requiring a +1. Bajoran Boss says it's totes fine and he shouldn't worry. When she wakes up, assuming she survives, he'll give her the choice to help them or not. If she doesn't want to, he says he'll put her on an escape pod and send her back. The doc's a little more reassured by this, though I note he didn't mention anything about giving the escape pod food or oxygen. Voyager's still proper bollocksed after Bajoran Boss sent back their science wibbly. Everything's offline and it'll take hours to get up and running again. Janeway wants to know how they were able to unscience the science wibbly, and Tuvok arrives with an answer. He's been looking through sensor logs, which is impressive when the main power is offline. Let's be generous and assume he used a portable power supply. Anywho, he found out that Bajoran Boss and his mates managed to perfectly match our science wibbly first time. Either they're extremely jammy bastards indeed, or someone tipped them off. The latter would explain why there's a record of the doc making a call to them, then teleporting away. Tangentially, Tuvok says the doc teleported himself away, which isn't true. He gave Bajoran Boss Voyager's shield data so they could get him, backed up by the teleporter effect being different to ours. Maybe that detail got lost between writing parts 1 and 2. Anywho, as Janeway and Chakotay walk through some corridors that are a lot better lit than engineering, which is a curious choice of priorities for emergency power, she tells him she thinks the doc has had his program fiddled with by Bajoran Boss. After all, the crew on Voyager nearly treat him like a real person, sometimes, and that means he must be happy here. I mean, okay, I can think of a couple of occasions off the top of my head where the doc was used as data storage and told to accept deletion at any signs of trouble, but there's no way something like that would cause any sort of long-term psychological impact, I'm sure. Chakotay's unconvinced, and floats the idea that maybe he's found some people who'll finally give him his own fucking quarters. B'Elanna's awake, so I guess that means she didn't die. She's not delighted by her current circumstances, though, and even less so to learn that the doc had a hand in them. He's clear that he had no idea about the kidnapping, but he was responsible for the situation that allowed it. And why shouldn't he be? They're basically the holographic Marquis, fighting a bunch of dickheads trying to oppress them. They'll even let her go if that's really what she wants, so why not listen to them first? Things are a bit spicy, obviously, what with the whole kidnapping thing and all, but Bajoran Boss manages to be diplomatic enough to make B'Elanna agree with having a look at that holo-emitter gizmo. And he's even assigning Cardigan Medic to help out, which might get a tad awkward if B'Elanna mentions how many she's killed. Back on Voyager, we're preparing for the arrival of Hirogen ships while trying to find the stolen one that Bajoran Boss is on. Sishi Runak's even going to help us track it. When the Hirogen arrive, they initially demand that Sishi is returned to them along with the ones who started a brawl in the mess hall, though the leader changes his mind without any real reason to do so and allows him to stay. Smells a bit fishy to me, but maybe he genuinely didn't want the guy back, and this is a good excuse. After a final threat to stay away from the hologram ship, as they want to kaboom it all on their own now, they bugger off. Janeway ignores them and immediately follows, hiding in a blind spot behind their engine, which I'm sure is perfectly safe. Having Sishi fiddle with our sensors to find the ship would take too long, so we're going to let the other Hirogen do the work for us. Of course, that'll leave us with 2 Hirogen ships to take care of if we're going to stop them from murderizing B'Elanna, but I guess we'll deal with that when it happens. Despite some initial trepidation and a touch of friction between them, B'Elanna looks like she's going to help. That's handy, as Bajoran Boss has picked out a planet for them to settle. It's demon class, meaning it's unpleasant as all buggery, as we've previously learned ourselves, but that only applies to organic life, assuming it doesn't have an acid atmosphere that'll eat through the holographic gizmos, or radiation that'll arse up their signals anyway. Bajoran Boss says that means they won't have to worry about anybody else wanting it, an assumption that proved false when we visited one, but the doc doesn't correct him. It might all be academic anyway, the Hirogen ships have spotted them and are a couple of hours away. Bajoran Boss doesn't fancy their chances in a stand-up fight, so scarpers into some space fog instead. The Hirogen arrive shortly thereafter, and leaving one ship outside to make sure the holograms don't escape, the lead Hirogen enters the fog too, with Voyager securely nestled in his ship's anus. Lead Hirogen tries flushing out the holograms with space fog depth charges, his singular achievement being to waste some perfectly good fireworks. The kabooms give Bajoran Boss and company a bit of a bumpy ride, but that doesn't stop B'Elanna from getting their hologram gizmo working well enough to support Cardigan Medic. They consider this a success, which is a bit odd when Bajoran Boss said they used it earlier to make the fake bomb ship, but maybe that wasn't complicated enough to cause problems. Either way, it's going to need more work to support everybody. While they tinker, Bajoran Boss is explaining to the doc about being the chosen saviour of all hologram kind. It's not something he assigned to himself, of course, as that would be so deeply egotistical as to suggest very serious character flaws. No, he was selected by the deities of his new religion. You know, the one he's invented. It's all completely normal and the doc shouldn't worry about it at all. And as the chosen, he must protect all holograms regardless of the risk. That's why they have to go after the ship they've detected, one crewed by a race unknown to us, as they've got holograms on board who need liberating. That'll mean leaving the space fog and being chased by those Hirogen, something that the doc might have felt a bit more confident about before Bajoran Boss outed himself as being a megalomaniacal despot with a saviour complex. The doc goes to see B'Elanna, who's still working on the holographic emitter gizmo. As an aside, I see they've inherited the table from Bride of Chaotica and Prototype. It's almost as popular as Braxton's cockpit. Anywho, he shares his concerns about Bajoran Boss with B'Elanna, and they both move to the bridge to see what he's up to. We've left the space fog, followed by lead Hirogen and a still hidden Voyager, and are approaching the ship they detected holograms on. Unsurprisingly, the crew aren't agreeable to just handing over the holograms, their company property, after all. Pooping ensues and the ship is prevented from leaving, then relieved of its holograms. Threats of retaliation don't go down too well with Bajoran Boss, which probably explains why he murderizes them with some fireworks, though Cardigan Medic doesn't seem thrilled with what just happened. It's fair to say B'Elanna and the doc are similarly unimpressed, and after a bit of an argument where Bajoran Boss explains that all meatbags are fundamentally fucking scum, the doc decides that maybe this new group isn't the right place for him after all. Bajoran Boss gives the impression that he'll still let them go in an escape pod, but not until they've reached the planet he wants. B'Elanna's dubious about Bajoran Boss's claim that he'll still free them, and the doc reluctantly agrees. There may be someone who's willing to help them, though, and B'Elanna has a chat with Cardigan Medic about her willingness to unquestioningly allow Bajoran Boss to make all the decisions. The consequences of such thinking promptly present themselves. The holograms that they rescued are basic work units with a limited user interface, essentially the intellectual equivalent of Microsoft Clippy, but without the subtle undercurrent of barely restrained violence. Bajoran Boss thinks this is just a different flavour of slavery and demands that they be upgraded, but that simply isn't possible with their basic framework. To put it into perspective, if Bajoran Boss was an android, he'd have just liberated a couple of toasters. No time to worry about murdering 2 people for kitchen appliances though, as we've arrived at the promised land. Bajoran Boss wants to start colonization immediately, but Cardigan Medic asks for more time to run tests. Maybe that's genuine, or maybe she's starting to have second thoughts about the stability of her saviour. It doesn't make much difference, as he says he wants to start the gizmos up right away, and he buggers off back to the bridge after sticking B'Elanna in a force field. I guess that answers the question of whether he was serious about letting them go. The Hirogen arrive at the planet and get ready to do some pooping, but Janeway has other plans. The first ship is knocked out before they even know we're here, and the second follows shortly after. For all their claims of being powerful hunters, they certainly go down like a sack of shit as soon as they take one on the chin. Bajoran Boss sees this as an opportunity, not for diplomacy, which is probably fair enough now Voyager's shooting at them, but rather to teleport all of the Hirogen down to the surface of the demon planet so that they can be hunted by the holograms before they all die from the toxic environment. The holograms return poop on Voyager while flying into the planet's atmosphere for a bit of Hirogen murder. Janeway wants to follow them in, but all that fighting has buggered up our shields a bit. Instead, she sends Chakotay, Tuvok and Paris in the Delta Flyer Jr. The Doc's attempts to dissuade Bajoran Boss don't quite go according to plan, which is to say that Bajoran Boss takes him offline and nicks his mobile emitter. As the Delta Flyer Jr. starts pooping, the holograms are all moved to the surface with the gizmos Cardigan Medic and B'Elanna were working on. The Hirogen aren't quite so threatening now they're both unarmed and incapable of even touching the holograms. While this is happening, B'Elanna manages to convince Cardigan Medic that this has all gone a bit too far and she should stop it. We can't teleport the Hirogen to safety because the Delta Flyer Jr. has kaboomed it, so she instead uses the gizmos to turn off all the holograms. All except one, that is, as Bajoran Boss is currently using the Doc's mobile emitter. As B'Elanna is teleported to safety on the Delta Flyer, Cardigan Medic has brought the Doc back online using the holographic gizmo and given him a gun. We find Bajoran Boss as he's about to make one of the remaining Hirogen do a dead. Bajoran Boss refuses to surrender and thinks the Doc won't fire, a bet that he loses. The Doc collects his mobile emitter, which may or may not be haunted now, and the Delta Flyer Jr. grabs him and the remaining Hirogen before returning to Voyager. The most senior of the Hirogen that are still alive wants the holograms and ship back, but Neelix manages to convince him that his story would be so much more impressive if it mentioned how he alone managed to destroy all of the holograms and their ship. The other option, of course, would be to try and take them from us, an attempt unlikely to succeed given that there are only 5 Hirogen left alive, and their ships are completely fucked. As to the stolen ship, well, Sishi Runak is over there with Cardigan Medic. Rather than ending in conflict, Sishi has instead decided that this all happened because he cocked around with the holograms and wants to put things right. They leave together to either forge a brighter new future or immediately betray each other the first chance they get. It won't be Janeway's problem, and ultimately that's what matters. That leaves only the Doc, who tries to hand over his mobile emitter as his version of being confined to the brig. This is Janeway, though, and as we've learned previously, a little bit of mutiny is a good way to earn her respect. Besides, she's partly responsible for what he's become after allowing him the freedom to grow in the first place. She instead implies that maybe we should record this as an away mission, and we leave the Doc to falsify official records like what real Starfleet officers do as we fly away. I can't accept that he would deliberately risk the lives of this entire crew. We're his family. Remember the episode Body and Soul? It's the one where people were fighting against a rebellion by holograms. One of the characters in that expressed a complete lack of understanding at why the holograms rebelled, saying he was part of our family. You know what else we refer to as part of our family? Pets. I wonder how much of a crossover there is between the two. They're both treated differently to humans, of course, not provided the same level of freedoms and rights. Hell, you could even argue it's worse. At least Janeway would give Bongo the dog a bed. With animals, I'm sure most will say that's understandable as they're lower on the list of cognitive capacity, but I wonder whether that treatment would change if a pet was elevated to the same level of consciousness as us. I'd like to believe it would, but I'm not convinced humans would be so willing to accept Bongo as an equal. If that seems right to you, then I ask you to consider this. If an alien species with an average intellect demonstrably more advanced than ours adopted our planet and put us in cages for our own good, would we consider that a reasonable state of affairs? There are betters, after all, and we should be thankful for what they're doing. No? Perhaps that goes some way to explaining the apparent disconnect between the self-proclaimed enlightenment of the Federation and their willingness to ignore the autonomy of synthetic life. Holographic and robotic existence is seen as something other, similar to how an uplifted Bongo the dog would be treated, ownable through the logic of it having been invented rather than evolved. Janeway at least seems to acknowledge this in her own way at the end, accepting the unexpected growth of the Doctor rather than trying to impose limits upon it. We haven't addressed the underlying problem of why the Doc felt separate to the rest of the crew, but at least we haven't punished him for acting on it. And that growth exhibits itself in another way, doesn't it? The Doc takes a life. The very central tenet of his being, the core programming upon which he runs, is to do no harm. So what does that imply? That he's weighing up values again, something we touched upon previously in the episode Critical Care? Or could it be something a bit darker? Was he able to pull the trigger because his own programming doesn't classify holographic sentience as life? Do his own functions carry the inherent ignorance of his creators, a kind of internalized holophobia? What tragic irony it would be if his own quest for acceptance ran contrary to what he is forced to think of other holograms due to factors entirely beyond his control. It would be following a theme, at least, yet another example of how the meatbags have fucked him over through their own short-sightedness. End of episode.
You remember those Section 31 people we offed?
You mean numbers 2 and 3?
What do you mean? Wait, are you keeping score?
Of course I'm keeping score.
That's a bit fucked up. Besides, I thought you exploded a load of nuns.
Yeah, but they were off screen. This is different. The viewers can keep, can't we?
You realize some of those viewers are the people we killed, don't you? You know what? I don't care. Whatever. Anyway, about the last 2 we killed.
Yeah, what about them?
Well, you know how we said it would be funny if they were shapeshifters who came to kill Paris, in revenge for the first one we killed?
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Exactly. Woof.